Chapter 15, The Vanished Driver. In silence, Nancy and Ned jogged along on their horse. The carriage they were following, its lights dimmed to the minimum allowed by the law, suddenly turned into a woods road. "This may be a trick," Nancy warned, "if he knows we're following him." She pulled gently on the reins to slow their horses' speed and went ahead cautiously. The carriage stopped abruptly. At once, Nancy reined in her mount, turned him quickly into the woods, and stopped. She patted his neck soothingly to keep him from pawing the ground or making any other noise. From among the trees, she and Ned could see a light moving along the road. They wondered whether the driver of the carriage was walking back looking for them, or whether he had lost something. As he played the light along the road, the hidden couple hardly dared breathe. They were so fearful of making a sound. In a few minutes, the man turned back and retraced his steps. Getting into his carriage, he started off. Nancy and Ned, hoping that the hoofbeats of the man's horse would drown out those of their mount, turned back to the road and once more started after the carriage. "I'm sure that fellow ahead knows he's being followed," Nancy said presently. "He may try something to trap us. We'd better watch our step." The horse and carriage were some distance ahead now. Suddenly, the horse began to gallop. The carriage swayed from side to side, and Nancy and Ned expected that at any moment it might turn over. "That fellow must be crazy to drive so fast," said Ned, "or else he's trying to lose us." He nudged their horse, and it began to run, bringing them closer. After a chase of 1/4 of a mile, the carriage stopped abruptly, blocked by a stream of water. The vehicle teetered a moment, but did not go over. As Nancy and Ned came nearer, the young sleuth again warned about a trap. "We can't tell what the driver's up to." "You stay here," Ned ordered. "I'll go ahead and find out what's going on." But Nancy objected. As Ned slid off the horse, she did also. She did consent, however, to stay behind him as they tiptoed forward, using the trees as protection against any sudden attack. But they were not molested, and in a few moments they reached the carriage. No one was in it. "Say, what's going on here?" Ned asked uneasily, looking around for any watcher. Nancy did not reply to his question. She was listening to detect any sound in the nearby woods which might indicate where the driver was. She could hear nothing but the chirping of crickets. "Ned," she whispered, "will you stand guard while I examine the furniture in the carriage? I want to be sure that it is part of the Follett collection." "Go ahead," he directed. The pieces of furniture were small enough for Nancy to lift out herself. One by one, she began to carry them to the carriage lamps and look them over. Although each in turn resembled items on Mrs. Tenney's list, there was no way to identify them as actually being the stolen articles. Disappointed, Nancy had returned all but one piece, which she now examined. It was a small hassock with mahogany legs and a petit point fabric top of red roses and festoons of green leaves. Excitedly, Nancy realized it fitted the description of a footstool taken from the Follett mansion. "Ned," Nancy whispered excitedly, "I'm sure we're on the right track. This looks exactly like one of the stolen pieces. And this horse is black like the one Holt took. I think both facts are pretty good evidence against him. Enough, anyway, to report this to the police." "Great," said Ned, but he reminded her that by the time they could get to a phone and report it, the thief might return and take everything with him. Nancy nodded. "You're right. Then we'll have to take the horse and carriage with us," she said. You ride our horse and I'll drive the black one." Ned objected to the arrangement at first. He did not think this was a safe thing for Nancy to do. He still felt that the man who had been driving the carriage was waiting for them in ambush and would prevent them from reporting the incident to the police. "You could be right, of course, Ned," said Nancy. "But I have a different idea about the whole thing. I think the man who was driving this carriage is not too familiar with these roads. He didn't know about this stream, and when he got here, he was afraid to cross it in the carriage." "Sounds logical," Ned conceded. "Too, he probably was afraid of being caught and ran off. He may be a mile away from here by this time. All right, we'll follow your suggestion." Nancy got into the carriage and urged the horse into a full turn. Then, leading the way, with Ned riding the other horse, she started off. Though both she and Ned outwardly had shown no fear of what they were about to do, each of them was nervous. It was possible that the man who had left the carriage had gone off for reinforcements. At any moment, Roger Holt and his assistants might come to claim what they considered was their property. What they might do to the young couple to keep them from going to the police gave both Nancy and Ned some uneasy moments. But as they reached the end of the woods road, the tension began to lessen. The riders were not stopped. In fact, they met no one on the road. Nancy, knowing none of the farmers in the neighborhood and seeing that the lights in the houses had been put out, decided that it would be wiser not to call the police from any of them. She concluded that the best place to go would be the dance. Half an hour later, she and Ned reached the Fishers. Instead of going to the barn, where the dance was still in progress, Nancy drove directly to the house. Getting out, she walked to the door and knocked. By the time it was opened by a smiling, broad-shouldered man, Ned had joined her. The Amish gentleman invited them into the kitchen. Together, they quickly told their story, and the farmer's face showed his astonishment. Fortunately, he had a telephone and offered to call the state police at once. "They will send a man here in a little while," he reported, after talking with the captain. "It is good that you two found the stolen furniture, but it is too bad that you should miss the dance. Why don't you go over there and make a square? I will call you when the police come." Nancy smiled and thanked him. She said that after what had happened to her, she was more ready for a bottle of liniment than a dance. "I guess I'm not so hardy as your Amish girls," she added. The man chuckled. He remarked diplomatically that even an Amish girl, who had been thrown out of a buggy and then ridden for miles bareback, would probably need a massage with liniment too. He offered to awaken his wife, to give Nancy a treatment, but she said, smiling, "A hot bath and a good night's sleep will fix me up." While waiting for the police to arrive, she and Ned talked to Mr. Fisher about the farms in the vicinity, and Nancy asked him if he had ever heard of a place called the Schnitz. "No," Mr. Fisher said, "but I have not lived here very many years. I came from Ohio." At once, Nancy asked him if he had ever heard of a Roger Holt from Ohio, but again the farmer shook his head. At this moment, a car stopped at the house, and 2 state police officers came in. They introduced themselves as Officers Wagner and Schmidt. "You are the couple who may have found some stolen furniture?" Officer Wagner asked Nancy and Ned. "And a stolen horse and carriage," Ned added. Nancy told the police about her interview at the carriage factory, and also of hearing that a black horse had disappeared from one of the nearby farms. Officer Schmidt pulled a little book from his pocket and turned several pages. "Here's a report on both items," he said. "And unless the person who stole the carriage added a final coat of paint to the underside of the right shaft, we may be able to identify the carriage." The group walked outside. Officer Schmidt took a flashlight from his pocket, got down on the ground, and beamed the light under the right shaft. A smile crossed his face. "This is it, all right," he said. "The final coat was never put on." Both officers congratulated Nancy and Ned on recovering the stolen carriage, then looked into the back of it. "What makes you think this is part of the collection of stolen furniture?" Officer Wagner asked Nancy. She told him about the petite point pattern on the hassock. He smiled and remarked that she certainly was a thorough and discerning detective. Ned was about to tell him more about Nancy's prowess, but she gave him a warning look, and he reluctantly kept still. "We'll take the horse, carriage, and furniture with us," said Officer Wagner. "And would you like us to return the horse and buggy you rented?" "Yes, thank you," said Ned, and told where the policemen would find the buggy. The officers said they would explain to the owner what had happened. Ned asked them to have the man whose buggy had been damaged send him a bill, and gave his address. After the police had gone, Nancy and Ned told the farmer they would go to the dance now and find their friends. They went outside and for the first time realized that Ned's cream-colored convertible was not there. They concluded that their friends must have gone back to the Glicks. "But how are we going to get home?" Nancy asked. "Surely somebody here will give us a lift," Ned suggested. They walked to the barn door and stepped inside. They had no sooner appeared than one of the Amish girls who was dancing stopped short and shrieked. Pointing a finger at the couple, she cried out, "The witch girl! The witch boy! They've flown back here to hex us!" The dancing ceased abruptly, and the musicians stopped playing. There was a surge of unfriendly-looking young men and women toward Nancy and Ned. Fearfully, the couple wondered what was going to happen. End of chapter 15.